Hello everyone, Loremaster Sotek here. Hope you're all doing well today. It is the day after Halloween and Friday, so this will be the last Greenskin Q&A for this week. So the Greenskin Q&A series will resume on Monday, but tomorrow and Sunday I'll be putting out some other stuff. So yeah, with that, let's go ahead and get started. Sorry it's coming out a little late today. Things have been a little crazy the last day or so. So let's go ahead and get into it. Our first question comes from Mischa, one of our lovely head moderator here, who asks, has a goblin or lesser orc ever managed to beat one of the Black Orcs? Yeah, all the time. Regular orcs, although Black Orcs are typically larger than them, they are fully capable of going toe-to-toe with Black Orcs. It's certainly not necessarily a purely fair matchup, but there are orcs who are large enough, either due to age or maybe they have a magic weapon or magic armor or something that allows them to just really easily handle dealing with a Black Orc. Like Gorfang Rotgut, who I talk about a lot, he easily puts down Black Orc challengers, no problem, which he faces all the time. So, yeah, it happens a bunch. I mean, even Skarsnik gets challenged by Black Orcs constantly. But he has Gobla. Gobla is basically Skarsnik's enforcer, and he can casually devour half of a Black Orc in a single bite. So that's kind of how it goes. Is especially for Goblin war bosses, Orc war bosses tend to just settle it by fighting themselves and just proving that they're the dead artist. But a Goblin will usually rely on some kind of enforcer. So if you're dealing with like a waagh that's been built up by forest goblins, then he'll have a gigantic spider mount, which we really need to get in the game. I was thinking about that the other day, is that we don't have gigantic spiders. That makes me sad, because they're spider mounts that are the size of like trolls. Very nasty. So they're not Arachnarok size, but they're kind of halfway. Whereas a wolf goblin might rely on either his mount or a chariot, or they might use like really high cunning to just either poison or debilitate their opponent. It just depends on the war boss and their particular style. There is I forget what the name of the book is off the top of my head, but there is a fairly classic story that has to do with dwarves and greenskins fighting, I think, over Carrick Varn. And there's a goblin war boss in it, and the way he enforces the rules is that he has a troll that he always keeps around him. And the troll's job is just to make sure that orcs don't mess with him. So, hopefully that answers that. Dasacht is our next question. Another, at least moderator on the live streams. So, it says, in regards to power, you and others have mentioned greenskins have a distinct, insane stamina, exhausting the likes of Sigmar and Karl, Franz, Belegar Ironhammer, and so on in stories just by outlasting them in a full-on brawl. Are greenskins really capable of outlasting these races based on raw brutal stamina power, or is it a matter of the other races just not outlasting greenskins' waagh energy? So the main question there seems to be, how do greenskins outlast everybody? Because greenskins do specialize in having insane stamina, and that is literally just because they have their physiology, the way their internal organs seem to work and all of that, they're just geared for fighting. So orcs in particular have just absurd stamina, and they can fight for a really, really long time. And it helps that, they tend to be so big and bulky and brutish that they don't really need to rely on skill or speed as much. They literally are just like bashing on you until they bring you down. So for them, it just tends to be a much easier matchup. When you have Belegar or Karl Franz fighting against a really powerful orc, they're not going to be able to win that fight by just like using all of their strength. They need to fight very cleverly, and they have to use all their skill, and they need to be dodging constantly. Most orcs don't even bother dodging. They'll just take the hit on their bodies or their armor and just have faith that it's going to be enough to ward off their opponent, which normally it does. So that kind of is the big thing about it. But greenskins are incredibly tenacious creatures. But it doesn't have anything to do with like the waagh energy. Granted, when a waagh gets going, that will juice orcs up. And it's so greenskins can be a little confusing because they use the term waagh for a lot of things. Like a massive army of greenskins is called a waagh, and then there is something that it's more of a 40k thing than a fantasy thing, but there's something that most people know as waagh energy, and that's not really a thing in fantasy. In fantasy, it's just that when a lot of greenskins get together, all of their like fanatical excitement can stir up the winds of magic like crazy, and that allows greenskin shamans to basically reach into it and easily manipulate the winds of magic, and it makes them really, really powerful, and they use their magic to buff all the orcs around them with various spells like Fists of Gork or Sneaky Stabbin' and all that stuff. And so that's how waagh energy in fantasy is not like a thing, it's just magic that's being used by shamans. If you don't have a shaman around you, then waagh energy is not a thing. Doesn't exist. That is purely a 40k concept. So greenskins, when it comes to like fighting and how their stamina works, that is almost 100% just their pure physicalness. But the thing I was going off to say is that there's also a third term for waagh, which is that greenskin, whichever war boss is leading a greenskin horde, basically can do something where he does what's being loosely you could call it him say like calling a waagh, which when a greenskin whoever the war boss is, in the lore it usually has to be an orc. In Total War they kind of expanded it out to all the greenskin characters for balance reasons, but in tabletop and in the lore only orcs can call a waagh if they're the war boss and the leader. And what that basically means is they're literally sitting up there and they go, waagh! And all the orcs, like, immediately start waahing as well. And it just it's just them getting stirred up into a frenzy. They can only do it once per battle because, you know, it's kind of like them expending all of their reserves and just going all out. But it's not something that's generated. It's just basically something the war boss shouts, and it's just the greenskins get really amped up and frenzied by it. But it will tire them out. The only goblin who was capable of calling a waagh was Grom the Paunch. Like, even Skarsnik can't call waghs in the lore. But so that's kind of the confusion around that, is that a large group of greenskins is called a waagh, and then there is a command, I guess you could call it, that's known as a waagh, which is when the war boss actually yells it, but it has to be an orc or Grom the Paunch that does it. And it only works on if an orc does it, only other orcs pick it up. Like, goblins do not have the physical ability for a waagh to really make them more dangerous, unless it was Grom, because that was something really unique to him. But hopefully that answers that. It can get confusing just because that word or war call means like different things depending on the situation. But the most important takeaway from this question, in my opinion, is that don't confuse magic with waagh as like an energy source. That's not a thing in fantasy. That's purely 40k. Alright, next question is from DatOrkBoss, who asks, how do greenskins get so many variants of other monsters to travel with them? They seem to have anything from wolves, boars, wyverns, trolls, giants, and many more. Why do greenskins seem to be even more talented at taming and even raising animals and monsters than most other factions? So, it's kind of a misconception. The thing about greenskins is that most tribes only specialize in maybe one or two creatures at best. So, like, orcs only have a relationship with boars. And that's because orcs and boars have very similar attitudes and desires and lifestyles, and it depends on the type of tribe as well. Like, savage orcs almost never raise their boars. It's more that the boars and the savage orcs tend to live in very similar environments and kind of follow each other around, because the boars know if they follow the greenskins, they're going to have really easy access to food, and the greenskins know if they have the boars around, then they have easy access to mounts. And a lot of savage orcs don't even like have a particular mount. They'll usually just, before a battle, they will literally run out into the field where all the boars are, sneak up on one and just grab it. And that's how you get your boar boys for the savage orcs. Regular orcs tend to be a little more structured about it, but they only have that relationship with boars because the two have like a symbiotic relationship, and they're both basically just wild animals that work really well in tandem with each other. When it comes to wyverns, we talked about that a bit either yesterday or 2 days ago, where night goblins go into the crags and the peaks and they identify where wyverns are going to nest. And they steal wyvern eggs and use that to trade with other tribes for really, really high amounts of wealth or weapons or whatever it is they need. And granted, only orcs are strong enough to control a wyvern. There has been one exception. There's been one goblin who has ever had a wyvern, which was I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but he was the shaman of Grom the Paunch, and he only managed to master that wyvern like really, really late into the Grom campaign. It was after they arrived on Ulthuan, when Grom's fleet got like annihilated by a big storm, and a lot of in a Empire fleet. Most of Grom's fleet died, but there were still so many of them left that it was a massive invasion of Ulthuan. And there was a goblin shaman who managed to dominate a tired wyvern and managed to kind of get something going there. But orcs and wyverns also kind of get along well, but they also have to tame a wyvern, you have to get it when it's a baby or like an egg, unless you're like Azhag, who's a little different. But you have to get them when they're super duper young, raise them, and even then they have to typically be kept in like chains or be fed constantly. They're very unreliable mounts. Like most orcs don't trust their wyverns. It's more of they just think wyverns make them look dead hard. So that's how you get wyverns and boars. When it comes to wolves, giant wolves have a very, very symbiotic relationship with regular goblins that you'll find in like the Wolflands and the Badlands. They basically just, the goblins just they didn't domesticate them, but they, in a greenskin way, domesticated them, where the wolves figured out that the goblins are reliable companions and are a reliable source of staying fed, and so they form big packs around these goblins, and the goblins raise the pups and all this other stuff. So, but that's the only creature those goblins have figured out. Then if you go to the forest goblin tribes, the only creatures they have a relationship with are the spiders. And that took generations to figure out. Basically, goblins started moving into those deep forests, and they had really complicated relationships with the spiders, where they were antagonistic towards one another. But what goblins figured out was that some of their shamans started indulging in trying the venom of various spiders. So they would like eat them or extract their venom to make potions and drink it, and they would like hallucinate really, really hard. But eventually the goblin shamans figured out that I forget what it's called, but there's a very particular type of spider that if they consume its venom or poison, whichever it is, they get a hallucinogenic vision of the spider god, or the feaster from beyond, as he's known, and they were able to communicate with the god of spiders. And when they did that through their hallucinations, they were able to figure out how to make a symbiotic relationship with the spiders. And they supposedly even figured out how to talk to them. There's another type of spider that's really specific that they have to use to communicate with the Ragnaroks. And it turns out the forest goblins 100% can communicate with spiders. So they can, it's a very limited form of communication because the spiders don't have a super complex understanding of language or anything. But they were able to basically have a back and forth and establish an alliance with all of the spiders of the deep forests. So that's how you get your spider riders and your gigantic spiders and stuff like that. And then it depends on the species from there. So some spider rider tribes will like steal the eggs of, I don't know if they always steal them, but they'll take the eggs of unhatched spiders and then they'll raise them in clutches around them. Or they just have like a really solid understanding with a certain brood or what have it. So then there's your giant spiders. And then for trolls and giants are really big, stupid creatures that pretty much anybody can hire on. It's just that greenskins are really some of the only people that tolerate them. And that's why you see trolls and giants in a lot of armies, not just greenskins. You know, you'll find trolls and giants with the Warriors of Chaos and the Norskins and who else? I mean, you'll find giants with the Ogre Kingdoms, even though they're slave giants, and you'll find Chaos Siege giants with the Chaos Dwarves. You can kind of think of giants as trolls. They're not greenskins. They're kind of like mercenaries to an extent. It's just that they are very destructive creatures that don't give two craps about listening to orders, and they will just devour anything that gets too close and defecate where they will, and they're very destructive. So most races are not willing to put up with them because of the dangers and the smell and the destruction that they unleash. You know, if you're going to have a giant in your army, he's going to devour copious amounts of alcohol, and he's going to like eat some of your troops from time to time, and he's going to make a mess of anything he walks through, whether he means to or not. And most armies are not willing to put up with that. They view that as a threat, not a benefit. But to greenskins, they're like, oh, that guy can wallop a dragon. Like, yeah, well, if he wants to eat some goblins and like make a mess, yeah, fucking whatever. That's fine. That's great. Trolls are very much the same. Very, very stupid, brutish creatures. And when you deal with them, they're as likely to listen to you as they are to eat you. But greenskins have kind of figured out how to bully them and have enough of a relationship with them that the trolls understand that, okay, if I listen to these guys and try to do what they tell me to while they're like whipping at me or whatever, then I'm going to get to eat. And I'm going to have like a stable system going that is okay with me. Most armies are not willing to put up with trolls because either they don't understand how to communicate with trolls, or they've just had so many bad experiences with trolls that they just immediately view them as kill on sight. Which is totally understandable because trolls are absolutely repulsive, disgusting creatures. So that's pretty much most of their animals and stuff. So it's not that the greenskins are better at it than a lot of races are. It's more of because greenskins are such a massive civilization. Well, civilization's a fond term, but they're such a massive, diverse species, and every subculture of greenskin pretty much has their own unique mount or their own unique animal that they get along with, depending on their like environment and their culture, that when the greenskins all get together to form a waagh, or really just a big army to raid, they just have a ton of exotic, crazy animals running around. So it looks like, oh man, these guys are like super gifted at taming. No, they're really not. It's just that when everybody, you know, if you're living in a neighborhood and one house specializes in raising dogs, another one specializes in raising parrots, another one, or cockatiels, whatever, another one specializes in cats, and those guys over there specialize in horses, and those guys over there specialize in cows. And if somebody comes into your town during a festival and sees all these animals running around, they're like, wow, this town's super exotic. But it turns out every house only has a single specialization. So it's more flattering to the greenskins as a whole than at a distance than it actually is. So that should answer that. Our next question comes in from Salito13, who asks, how did the greenskins allies / tame their non-greenskin? Okay, we already answered that. Rickados asks, who would win, a grot goblin or a hobgoblin? In a straight out brawl, well, first of all, grots is just the Age of Sigmar term for goblins. So it's a copyrightable version of goblin. So who would win in a goblin versus a hobgoblin? Always a hobgoblin, because hobgoblins are notably larger. Hobgoblins are roughly the size of a man, like a human being. So in that, you know, that 5 to 6 foot ballpark, whereas regular goblins are more of in the 3 to 5 foot ballpark. And then you have, for anyone that's curious and watching this, then from like, I would say somewhere between 2 to 3 or 2 to 4 feet, you're going to have noblars. And then from less than a foot to 2 feet, you have snotlings. Because I know a ton of people have a hard time telling the difference between all the goblin subspecies. Next up is Shushwaka, who asks, how many free hobgoblins, as in not Chaos Dwarf servants, are there, and where do they live? Besides the mercenary Wolf Rider captain, what notable hobgoblins exist? So there are a ton. Most hobgoblins are not servants of the Chaos Dwarves. Even the ones that hang out with the Chaos Dwarves, the infantry hobgoblins are their legit servants. The wolf riding hobgoblins are more like mercenaries that the Chaos Dwarves have a relationship with, and they'll come down occasionally. But if you go on the eastern side of the Mountains of Morin, you'll find the Eastern Steppes, and in those lands, which are they're ways north of Cathay, that's where the hobgoblin empire is, and it's like where 99% or maybe 95% of their culture is, and their individuals. So there are tens, if not hundreds of thousands, probably hundreds of thousands of hobgoblins over there that are free, and they do their own thing. But that's where they live. And then, are there any notable hobgoblins? Not really. Hobgoblins only exist inside the Chaos Dwarf bubble. There was a famous hobgoblin during the Dogs of War days, but as I explained in an earlier video, I don't tend to elaborate on the Dogs of War because they're not really canon anymore. They are not relevant to understanding the Warhammer Fantasy universe. They are more like gratuitous exceptions that aren't real anymore. They're not around. Games Workshop phased them out because all of them were 99% of them were very goofy on purpose, and they were very exaggerated, and the ways that they made sense in the lore were horribly exaggerated just to explain how they could even exist. And just as an example, and why I don't like to talk, not that I don't like to talk about them, but I don't think it's conducive to helping people understand the world building of Warhammer Fantasy. Like, take Tichi Huichi's Raiders, which are my favorite Dogs of War unit. They are it's a bunch of skinks that ride on horned ones that could join up with certain armies. They went like all over the world because what they would do is they would show up to a settlement, and they would, instead of working for gold, they would basically they would charge whoever hired them, like, oh, give us these sacred plaques or these sacred lizardman items that your great ancestors stole from Luster or the Southlands, and we'll work for you. But the way it actually worked was that there was a Slann in the Southlands who would, from thousands and thousands of miles away, telepathically tell Tichi where to go, and he would also telepathically take over the mind of the people Tichi Huichi was going to work for, and like whisper in their ear, oh, you should hire this guy, and would help. Like, the Slann would basically bridge any language gaps and would directly take over people's minds to influence them to hire them so that they could get paid in these artifacts and then do some fighting and run away, which is super weird and just kind of like throws out, it's just really messy. So there are a lot of people who are fans of the Dogs of War, and I think when I answered this question either yesterday or the day before, someone was like, well, actually, there's a Dog of War, like, Dogs of War don't count. So are there any notable hobgoblins? No, not in the old world. No, there is a Hobgoblin, which is a confusing thing because a lot of hobgoblins take the name Khan as a title, but there is like a legit great Hobgoblin who is like the biggest, most badass hobgoblin. So that would be the only notable one, but there's super little information about him. Like, I can't even tell you if he's currently alive, and like that's the great Hobgoblin, or if there was one but he died a long time ago, or if maybe there was one that's still alive, or maybe there was one but it's a title that's passed down. Like, there's no reference material for that has been published in the last 15 years. So next up is Chosen of Cain, who asks, are Warhammer hobgoblins similar to the Dungeons and Dragons concept of hobgoblins? I have no idea, because I don't know what the Dungeon and Dragon hobgoblins are. Just a quick rundown of what a hobgoblin is. Hobgoblins they're man-sized goblins, so they're a lot taller than regular goblins. They're much lankier. They have longer arms and very large hands for goblins. So they're built weirdly. They are considered the sneakiest and most backstabby form of all greenskins because they have no loyalty to other greenskins. A lot of people have asked, like, oh, could I bribe a goblin to betray other greenskins? Most of the time, greenskins have at least a vague loyalty to themselves, to their species. Hobgoblins will sell out anybody to advance their own agenda, which is why all the other greenskins hate hobgoblins, is because that literally happened during the Black Orc Rebellion in Zarnagrand, when the Chaos Dwarves were on the cusp of losing and were about to be wiped out by the Greenskins. Like, the Greenskins were about to take over the Chaos Dwarf Empire, which would have been a huge deal. Because, I mean, the Black Orcs even being created had a dramatic impact on the world. If they had successfully won that rebellion and wiped out the Chaos Dwarfs and took over their empire, it would have been huge. But they lost because near the end, the Hobgoblins backstabbed them in order to further their own agenda. And the Greenskins have, like, memorized that as a racial thing and just hate Hobgoblins because of it. So, those are the big things you need to know about a Hobgoblin. If that's similar to what D&D ones are, then yes. If not, then no. And of course, the other thing is that they tend to we talked about what kind of weapons they like to use. They're very big on archery and wolf riding. So, next up, Fewer. He asks, since greenskins are a fungus, do we have any examples of them being infected by other fungi? Alternatively, have greenskin spores ever infected other humanoid or oxygen CO2 based creatures? No, not really. No. Well, okay, there's one exception. The only time greenskins have ever been, like, infected by another creature or spore or anything was during a crisis in Orc Slayer, which is a Gotrek and Felix novel, where the main antagonist was this very bizarre insect-like creature called the Sleeper. And the Sleeper was a horribly mutated and colossal ant queen-like thing that was a primordial entity that had been basically wiped out by the dwarves. And it was like the last of its kind. And it bargained with the Chaos Gods to make it immortal and grant it power and all this other crap so it could survive. And when it made its resurgence during Orc Slayer, it somehow had a innate ability to just mind control greenskins. Basically like they were slave ants in a colony. So either through some kind of bizarre pheromone system or through, like, being able to release its own version of spores that could overwhelm or infect greenskins, it literally made all the greenskins in that entire area into perfect slaves. So they had no willpower, no minds of their own. So it was able to control all of them at once and completely coordinate them like insanely well, which of course made the greenskins one of the most deadliest threats. Which is why the greenskins in Orc Slayer are hands down the scariest greenskins there are. And it even had the ability to change their physiology by using these artifacts that it seemed capable of producing, where it could create these necklaces that, if worn, would make the greenskins turn like a pale white color, like they were almost like they were molding, and it would make them literally invincible. Like, we're talking 1000% invincible orc war bosses. The only way that they would die is you had to take the necklace off of them, and that would make them mortal and you could kill them. So it was able to drastically influence greenskins mentally and physically to like a god tier level. But it's dead now because Gotrek and Felix killed it. So, but it was the last of its kind. So I would say outside of that, no to both questions. And then the last question for today is going to be from DatOrk. Actually, this question I'm going to do tomorrow because there's something I want to check about it. So I'll come back to that one. Our last question for today is Cat59's. What's it like being a shaman shroom? Is there any benefit to it? Or does it just mean you're going to get ate? What are the effects of eating a shaman shroom, and have any non-greenskin casters ever tried to eat one? Would a human wizard have the same benefits of eating one as a goblin shaman? Okay, so shaman shrooms are actually one of my favorite night goblin subjects because they're really fun. So when a night goblin shaman, you have to be a shaman for this to happen. If a night goblin shaman eats too many shrooms that augment his abilities during their life, eventually there's some threshold, either due to a bad shroom or just who knows, they will turn into a shaman shroom. Now, turning into a shaman shroom is not something anybody does on purpose. It is a whoops. It's a big whoops. Because when you turn into a shaman shroom, you are doomed to get eaten by somebody. It is noted, hilariously, that night goblin shamans who turn into shaman shrooms are still conscious and aware. Like, they are 100% aware. Because it's noted by night goblin culture or shaman culture that turning into a shaman shroom is apparently super dull and boring until you get eaten. And yes, for anyone wondering, they are conscious enough that they feel everything and can feel themselves being devoured. In any event, so if you play Total War Warhammer, you know that Night Goblin Shamans have a basic ability in multiplayer and single player called Magic Mushrooms, where they can literally eat a shroom to lower the cooldowns on their spells and stuff. Those are shaman shrooms. Like, that's literally what a shaman shroom is. And which, granted, in tabletop or in Total War Warhammer, they made it lowers your cooldowns. Where in fantasy it was a little more explicit that what it actually is they eat it and it just charges them full of magic. Because in tabletop, if you ever took a Night Goblin Shaman, what made them really unique compared to regular Goblin Shamans is they always eat a shroom every single time they cast. Like, you didn't have a choice. They had to do it. So it made their magic a lot stronger, but there was a 1 in 6 chance that it would be a bad shroom, or they'd ingest too much of it and they'd get too magically charged and their head would just pop. So you would just die or turn into a shroom or something. So shaman shrooms are just edible fungi that are supercharged with magic. You can almost think of it as like warpstone, but as a fungus instead of like a mutating green rock. If anybody can eat them though, because they do just charge your body full of magic, but they're super duper dangerous because if you get too much magic in your system, like greenskins like to, if a greenskin gets overwhelmed with magic, pop, your head will literally just explode. It'll detonate. And that'll happen to you whether you're a greenskin or a person. Because that's what a lot of what miscasting is, for anyone that's curious, which is when someone loses control of magic and there's like a backlash. It's because you either lost control of it, like you goofed up in your casting and it spirals out of control, or it's because you just have way too much magic and you're not able to keep a hold on it. So eating a shaman shroom is super duper dangerous. But any wizard can utilize shaman shrooms, and as such, they're very, very desirable commodities by casters who are willing to seek power by any means necessary, no matter how dangerous it is. So, shaman shrooms are like a forbidden ingredient or a forbidden material that's desired by wizards the world over. So, that should answer all your shaman shroom questions. But in any event, we're out of time, so that's going to be it for today. I will see you guys for the next Greenskin Q&A on Monday. We're going to be doing something different for tomorrow and Sunday. That way this channel isn't just a pure Q&A channel. So in any event, thank you all for watching. I will see y'all tomorrow. Thanks, guys. Bye.